All right. We are now streaming live on Facebook and live on YouTube. We are going to get the meeting for April 21st started. It's a council committee meeting. So we have quite a few items on the agenda. So first we're going to have Ms. Hoffman call roll. I'm going to unmute everyone in order as Ms. Hoffman calls your name. So just bear with me. This might take a little more time than normal. Okay, Mrs. Hoffman, you've been unmuted.
Mr. Burke, Mr. Cahill,
Tom Cahill present.
Miss Kyle, Mr. Skidmore,
Go ahead.
Mr. Skidmore,
Don Skidmore, present.
Miss Sudcamp,
Camp is present.
Miss Cahill,
Kathy Cahill, present.
Mr. Meyer,
Gary Meyer, present.
Miss Skidmore,
Renee
Miss
Skidmore, present. Renee
Miss
Skidmore,
Pitts.
present.
Corinne Pitts, present.
Mr. Knightley, Mr. Nicely,
I'm here.
Miss Reckers,
Rebecca Reckers here.
Mr. Hermes.
Mr. Hermes present.
All right. Thank you, Mrs. Hoffman. I appreciate you calling roll. I know that was a little lengthy. So the first item on the agenda tonight is the Erlanger Employee Incentive Ordinance. Mr. Hermes has put this on the agenda, so I'm going to unmute him and let him talk. And then once he's finished, we'll open up for some questions. Again, please raise your hand and we'll be able to do one at a time.
All
Go
right.
ahead, Mr.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Kramer and I have worked on this a little bit, and we've talked for a while about trying to incentivize the employees of the city who both, work for the city, but also live inside the city limits of Erlanger. Right now, we have about 150 people that work for the city full time, and there are currently 12 people that, of course, other than council members, but 12 full-time employees who work for the city and live inside the city limits. Right now, this isn't a stat that we are going to talk much about because it's not very favorable. But I think that we can eventually work on making that statistic better. I think it shows better for the city. It looks better for the city if we have more of our employees who control a lot of, people's experience and involvement with the city they live in, that also decide they want to live inside the city limits. Mr. Kramer came up with the incentive as it's written, that it would essentially be the people who live here get $1,000 more per year. The intent behind that would be that it would be enough to pay for the taxes, the property taxes on a large majority of the population, the housing population inside the city. Mr. Kramer, is there anything more that you'd like to talk about on that?
No, I think that covers everything I researched on it, yeah.
Am I still on? Okay. So, I mean, the other thought behind this, that Mr. Kramer and I talked about, is that it's a relatively low entrance fee, if you want to look at it that way. If we are to do something like this, it would be up to about $12,000 this year, the impact on the city, and would make someone, the potential is to make an employee think more about being inside the city when it comes to buying their next house, upgrading their home after they've gotten a promotion, if they want to try to improve the quality of their life and they decide to move into the city. I think that shows a lot for the city of Erlanger. I know that our employees know how great we are here in Erlanger, but I would love for that statistic to show that. Thank you.
Okay, I see Mrs. Pitt's hand. Let me get you unmuted here. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I totally understand what Tyson is saying, but I do not think it's a good idea for several reasons. And I know I've mentioned them before. Our police officers that patrol the streets, many police officers do not like to live in the same city they patrol in, safety reasons and other reasons. And I totally respect that and understand that. There's people, people live in areas for different reasons, for personal reasons. And it's nothing against our city, but some people like living on farms and live out, out further and have land and horses, or, I just have a problem with, I feel like it's not fair to those who cannot live in Erlanger or, live out where there's a lot of land and can't. And I like incentives for our employees, but I just don't think personally, in my opinion, that this is the right way to go.
Okay. All right, I see. This is Kyle. So hold on one moment while I unmute you. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I agree with Corrine. I'm not for this idea. I don't think $1,000 would change my mind about where I'm going to live. So I really don't think it would be that much of an incentive for me to change my plans. I mean, when you buy a house, you look for a lot of different things. You're not necessarily looking for a particular city. And I think it's unfair to all the employees that we have who work so hard and come to work, they're loyal. And it's almost, to me, it would be almost an insult to them, like, well, you don't live in the city, so we're not going to give you $1,000. So I just don't think it would be an incentive for me to move into the city for $1,000. I understand the idea, I understand the concept, but I just don't think it would be that much to make somebody change their mind about where they want to live. That's it.
I hear what you're saying, and I want to make sure it's clear that the original intent on this was to be able to say that the employees could live inside the city tax-free. However, we cannot do that. That is not legal. So this is the best way that we could find, essentially reimbursing the employees for what they would pay in taxes. So that's the way we were thinking about trying to sell it. Not necessarily that you get more because you're an Erlanger employee necessarily. You live here, you work here, you essentially get your property taxes for free.
Can't hear.
You're unmuted. Go ahead.
Okay, can I talk now?
Yes, ma'am. Mhm.
Okay. I agree with the ones ahead of me. I just think it's not a good use of our taxpayers' money to reward 12 people. Those 12 people might live in the city, but they might not be as hardworking as the other employees that we have. And I think that kind of pits employees against employees, those who live in the city, those who don't live in the city, who maybe can't uproot right now to move to the city if they wanted to or did not want to. I think now is not the time to even be spending $12,000 more. If you want to in the future think about it again, yes, but I do not think this is a good use of taxpayers' money right now.
Okay. Mr. Hermes, one moment. Okay, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Well, I think Corinne has a really great point there, and I understand that the policemen may not want to live inside the city that they patrol, but our police department is made up of a lot more people than just patrolmen, and certainly people that could afford homes inside Erlanger. I guess to Mrs. Cahill, Mrs. Kyle, and Mrs. Pitts, I would ask, why do you think that there's only 8% of the employees that choose to live inside the city? Why is that number so low?
Okay, I see Mrs. Recker's hand. Hold on one moment. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to answer Tyson's question, and that is the free market. I mean, Erlanger is a phenomenal place to live, but if somebody wants to live in a different part of Northern Kentucky and loves the family in Erlanger that they work with, I'd like to revisit some sort of an incentive program, maybe in 6 months, once we kind of see where the economic climate takes us with this fiscal year. But I don't think it's something we should visit right now. I'm with Corinne and Kathy and Vicki. So thank you.
Okay, is there any other comments on Mrs. Kyle? One moment. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, in answer to Mr. Hermes, I think sometimes when people are shopping for a house, they have a certain type of house in mind. And when you look in different places, you may not necessarily be shopping for a particular place. So, you might just find the house that you really, really fell in love with in Florence, or maybe it's in Lakeside Park. That's what I'm saying. I don't think it's a matter of, I'm going to pick this house because it is in Erlanger. I mean, maybe some people do, but there are a lot of people that just look at houses and have a certain type of house in mind and where they can get the best bang for their buck. I mean, I just don't see that $1,000 is going to change a person's mind about where they're going to live. But I agree with everybody else too. I don't think now is the time to even consider something like this with taxpayers' money. I think we could probably revisit it at a later date. Thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Skidmore?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. My comment on this is when doing an interview and someone is being interviewed who lives in Erlanger and the other person who's being interviewed does not live in Erlanger, does that give an unfair edge to the one who lives in Erlanger because they're wanting the incentive? And I agree with everybody else's comments. My comment here was just a little on a different slant. So does that make sense? Hello?
Hermes, hold on one second. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. I don't necessarily have an answer for Mrs. Skidmore. I don't think that that would matter, but of course, yeah, the intent isn't that we're trying to hire more people. The intent would be that we're trying to encourage our employees to buy within Erlanger. You know, this is a lot like the statistics with our tax rates. You know, that very first year that we took a property tax decrease, it was such a minuscule amount that people received that it didn't seem to make that much difference. We had the same argument back then. You know, the economy is always going to be scary. There's always going to be a dark cloud looming on the horizon. It's like that every year. It's always going to seem like the wrong time, and it's never going to seem like it's a big enough incentive. But we have to start someplace. This is like I said before, this is a very small entry fee. But if we can begin to build over the course of, say, 5 years or 10 years, and we say then that 50% of our employees who work here also live here, it says a lot for the city that they have built. So yeah, it doesn't seem like much, and it doesn't seem like it's worthwhile now, but this is just starting the ball rolling in the right direction. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other comments on this topic? Mr. Skidmore, hold on one second.
Can you hear?
Go ahead. Yep.
Can you hear me now? I don't
Yes.
think it's necessary to do this myself. Maureen, I think we'll just leave it alone for a while. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, anybody else have anything to say about that topic? Okay. We will move on to number 2 on the agenda, compensation of elected officials ordinance. Mr. Hermes has it on the agenda, but I see Mr. Myers' hand raised. You have a question? Not letting me unmute you.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor.
There you go.
Just kind of going through this first topic that we've had, I'm wondering if we could, switch this up and just ask people to unmute themselves. I know we're missing lots of individuals that are attempting to speak, and it just doesn't seem to be flowing very well through any conversational style.
Well, I understand, but everybody has to go on mute because we've done this twice now and we've had issues. I've had quite a few complaints about people talking over top of each other and not being able to hear because there's background noise. So I know I'm trying to correct the situation and I might be overcorrecting. Can we give it one more go? Or do you want me to just unmute everybody?
I'd rather have us unmuted and just ask everybody to be conscious and mute themselves when they're not speaking, just to try to, move through some of our topics with a little better flow. That's just one man's thought here.
All righty. Everyone is unmuted. You've muted yourself. So if you aren't speaking, you don't intend to speak, I ask that you please mute yourself.
All right, is it okay for me to go ahead and get started?
Yes.
All right, so the ordinance that we've had, let's see, have we had a first reading on this already?
Yes, we have.
Okay, thank you. I think that, well, this is maybe a chicken and an egg type of issue. I don't know if this came about because, I don't remember exactly if this came about because of a survey that I had put out there on Facebook, or if the survey came out because of this proposed ordinance. But back on September 20th of 2019, I put out a survey on Facebook and asked people if council members should be paid for the meetings that they don't attend. At that time, we had 133 people who voted on it. 128 of those people said to pay the council members for the meetings that they attend. And 5 people said, no, just continue as it is. Also in that same survey, there were 36 comments. There were 4 people who commented that they thought it would be good if there was a policy like allowing people to excused absences. There were 6 people that said, if you don't show up, you don't get paid, period. So at the time, we had juggled back and forth between 2 different schools of thought on the compensation. One was taking the entire salary of the council members and splitting it over 24 meetings. If you didn't show up at the meeting, you didn't get paid that amount. And so as it stands right now, that is $4,367 and some change. So if we paid per meeting, it would be $181.99 per meeting. If you only showed up to one of the required meetings, either the committee meeting or the council meeting, you'd only get paid $181.99 for that month. Some people thought that that would be too harsh and that we shouldn't go to that extent, and that maybe we should allow a base pay. I'm sorry, let me back up. If we split it over 24 meetings, the idea was we could allow 2 absences. Allowing 2 absences would give people some leeway. The other way was allowing a base pay and then doing a smaller amount that would get us up to the same amount that council is being paid now. And that's kind of where we are right now. So there's the base pay of $3,167 per year, split over 12 months, plus $50 per meeting. But then we've still added on the 2 paid absences. So that's where I think, I would say it's one way or the other. Either we don't do the base pay and allow 2 paid absences, or we do the base pay with a lower amount of reimbursement for the regular meetings, but don't have any absences allowed. Thank you for the time to share that.
Anybody have questions for Mr. Hermes on this topic? Okay. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Tom.
So, Mr. Hermes, I do have a question about this. So the survey that was out on Facebook, was this one that went to Erlanger residents, or was this on your private page?
It was on my city council page.
Okay, so these were all citizens of the city? You verified those?
I did not necessarily.
Okay, so even if we're looking at the population, you're looking at less than 1% of the people that were sent out that maybe or maybe not Erlanger citizens. I think we've come to a good compromise that Mrs. Reckers put out there, and I kind of like what we're doing with this. It holds some accountability for folks. It also allows us things in our life that do happen to allow us to be able to have those excuses. So that's what I'm thinking on this.
Okay, thank you.
Don's raising his hand.
He can unmute himself. Unmute. Go ahead, Don.
Oh, okay. I think what Mr. Hermes is talking about is peanuts for his council members. And I think the council members all works pretty hard. And this is peanuts when we come along with a budget and talking about $500,000 plus for a park. And the council is the lowest paid there is, and same with the mayor. And I think they do a lot of the work for it. And I think you're not talking about big money, but I think you leave the council, they should get more money and start cutting the budget to where maybe the council would do more than they're doing, and which you're doing a good job now. Thank you.
I love Rebecca's plan that we did the first reading on. It makes sense. We should get paid something every month because especially this past month, we've been notified every single day about something. We're always on call. We're always talking to residents. We're always answering questions. So we should have a base pay, and we should have 2 excused absences. And then any additional council meetings we cannot attend, we shouldn't be paid for those council meetings. So I think she's laid it out beautifully, and I would love to do a second reading on it. Thank you.
Okay. Mrs. Cahill, you can unmute yourself.
Oh, okay. I agree with Rebecca's plan. I liked it. Base pay, so much per meeting, and 2 absences because things happen that people can't control. And we've had the first reading on it, and I think she gave a lot of thought to it. And I totally agree with it. I think it's a great plan. We should stay with it.
Okay, anybody else have any questions? Mr. Meyer, go ahead and unmute yourself.
There we go. I guess I wasn't sure if Councilman Hermes was actually making a recommendation to change, or what the specific changes were. I know we're talking a lot about it, but I'm not clear on what specific change is being recommended to what we had in the first reading. So I guess I'm just asking for that clarification. I mean, I think with the way it's presented, seemed reasonable, a step forward and in making some changes without making a complete overhaul.
Mr. Hermes.
Yes, Mr. Meyer, thank you for letting me clarify that. My recommendation would be to remove the 2 absences. Again, people they'll still be getting a base pay amount. So it's not that they're going to get nothing. Give me 1 second here. So there's every month, regardless if they show up or not. So if they do happen to miss a meeting because life happens and something unexpected comes up and they can't make it, they're not getting paid nothing. They're still being reimbursed for all these phone calls and, the helping out the people of our community. But if they miss a meeting, then they miss that $50.
Any other questions? Mr. Meyer, do you have? Go ahead.
So Mr. Hermes, I think essentially what we're talking about is the equivalent of $100. If we take out that, is that correct? The $50 per meeting?
Depends on how much the council member misses.
So over a year, potentially $600. I'm trying to remember what the amount was that was a $50 per regularly scheduled meeting.
Yeah, it'd be $100 per
So
month.
$1,200
Potentially
potentially.
$1,200 if they
Don't show up to anything.
Correct.
Yeah. I mean, I don't necessarily see a problem with that. I mean, I'm talking, as Mr. Nicely said, we're talking, peanuts and with those amounts. I can go
Ultimately,
either way.
the goal, I think, of any of this is to encourage people to be at the meetings.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easy for us to say we all want to be here. I mean, we all ran the position. We all got not doing this for the pay. We're doing this for love of the city. We want to be involved with the decisions. We want to just be able to give a little bit of additional incentive for people who show up regularly.
Okay. Don Skidmore, I see your hand raised. You can go ahead and unmute yourself. Go
Can you
ahead.
hear me? Okay.
Yep.
Well, people that runs for council, they know when they run what they're up against, what kind of meetings they got to go to, what they need to attend. And I think it ought to be handled on a personal level with maybe Matt Kramer or somebody that's got a title to say, hey, if you don't come to a lot of meetings and we would like to know why, because a lot of people may have some serious medical illness with their spouse or something. And a lot of people they like to keep things personal and sort of keep it at that. And maybe somebody could, not really counsel them, but say, hey, you missed a lot of meetings. What's the problem? And if you don't think you can keep up, maybe you ought to make a move and go in a different direction, maybe resign or whatever, but to get somebody that we've had in the past that's only been to 2 meetings in 2 years. I mean, that ain't our fault. Somebody should have corrected that before it got that far. And I don't want to see that's a black mark against the ones that comes. You understand what I'm saying?
I don't understand that would be a black mark for the people who attend.
I'm sorry.
I don't understand what you're saying, that could be a black mark for the people who attend.
Well, it's not a black mark for the people who attend or anything. And I don't mean for it to be that way, but it's like, everybody knows that happened in the past and that should have never got that far. And I don't know whether that's got a bearing on what we're trying to do now or not. Because we don't know what this next election is going to present. So, it's, I mean, the most of us in this past term has done fairly well for his attendance. And I mean, it just, I think we ought to pretty much leave it alone for right now until we get through this election.
Mr. Skidmore, there is a Kentucky revised statute If somebody, and I don't know it offhand or by heart, maybe Mr. Gatlin could help us with that. But if someone misses so many meetings, they can be voted out.
That's fine. They're putting themselves in that position. Nobody else is putting them there.
Right. I don't think we have anybody that's to that level.
No, we don't. But it's like, everybody pretty much knows where they need to be and when they need to be there. So that was part of the thing when you got voted in. So, I mean, I think it needs to be on a discipline level of discussion with that person before it gets, really out of hand, is to know why that they're doing what they're doing. I mean, I don't, I think it's what it is.
Ms. Pitts, I saw your hand raised. You can unmute yourself.
I understand where Don was coming from. Several years ago, we had a council person that basically showed up to probably 4 meetings in 2 years. And so he's just saying we shouldn't be penalized because somebody did that. And so again, I don't know how long we're going to go back and forth with this. So I guess we just need to decide, are we going to change Rebecca's thing that we've already done a first reading on? Or are we going to, leave it as is and vote on it next meeting?
I guess I kind of want to interject for just a moment, because
Okay.
I don't think what you guys are referring to has any bearing on this conversation. Like, I don't think it was playing a role. I think what Mr. Hermes is trying to accomplish is, if you're going to run for election, you're going to take on this responsibility, then be here. And, in a lot of other boards, it's you show up, you get paid. You don't show up, you don't get paid. So, us previously being on the PDS management board, you get your money if you're there, you don't get your money if you're not there. And whether or not you are working outside of the meeting, that's all part of the responsibility. And I think what Mr. Eckers had built into this ordinance, which was very well put together, is you had that base salary that was accommodating all of the outside of the meeting requests. So that $1,200, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but that base was covering those outside of meetings. And then you had the other part of that handling the actual meetings and having that per meeting. So I guess what I was thinking was, you had the base salary for the outside stuff, and then you had the per meeting amount, and you're either there or you're not. I mean, we don't get excused absences at other boards. That's just not something that they keep track of. I mean, what we also have to think about is there's a record keeping of this and payroll. So if we are going to do it, now we're going to have a system of keeping track of those excused absences. Was it as an excused absence? There's another level of complication that adds of, you're either here or you're not. So just thinking about it from a record keeping perspective, payroll perspective, making this as easy to implement as possible also has to be a consideration. So that's just my 2 cents. Not that I have.
I think that's an important distinction there, and I had forgotten about the administrative burden that might be added there. So from that aspect, I mean, in reality, we're talking about 2 paid absences, and we are talking about $100 per year, right? I mean, so if they miss them all, then yeah, it's more than that. But we're only talking about the 2 that they would get paid for. I don't see any reason not to strike that from the existing ordinance. That's the only change that we're really talking about.
So I think we're talking in circles here, because we talked about the administrative burden on this, of managing this, payment or not payment. So why are we changing this at all? because the straight salary, the monthly salary takes care of all of that.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Tom.
And we mentioned this. We mentioned this in the February or January committee meeting when it was originally brought forth, and then we made some modifications specific to cost of living on the per meeting variance. So and we talked to Kara about how difficult it would be to implement. She said it shouldn't be an issue if that's still correct. I mean, so this is now the middle of April. We've had 2 first readings. I mean, I think it's the drafting has been perfected, and it should be moving forward to a second reading at the next meeting.
Any other comments? Mrs. Cahill, you can unmute yourself.
Little empathy in the 2 meetings, I think is a great thing. I think things happen maybe if they haven't happened to you, or you haven't been exposed to something bad happening, where you might have to miss 2 meetings, not because you want to, not because you didn't realize this when you were elected, but things happen that you can't control, and allowing those 2 absences because of things that are not under your control, I think was great that Rebecca added it to it. And I totally agree. Let's have the second reading and let's agree to what we agreed upon. Everything was taken care of. She did her homework. She did everything was needed. She asked Kara. It's not going to be an issue. So let's stick with what we started with and not keep on trying to reinvent the wheel here.
Okay, any other questions? Mr. Nicely, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah. Reason, I've got a couple comments. Mr. Hermes says you got to have so much money, but the voters votes the people in. If you don't go to meetings, there's no rules that says you got to be there. You don't get it. There's no elected office says you got to be there so much, but you kill it. You kill this. And why do we spend this much time on peanuts when we got so many other important things to do and big money than this? And a lot of people don't like it to get to the meetings because you kill them. Thank you.
I wouldn't mind saying something else.
Okay,
I don't know if I'm still on or not.
you are.
Okay. I work with budgets every day, and I know it's hard to, especially in construction, commercial construction, it's hard to change a budget, or lower a budget, or lower the costs, I should say, without a lot of small steps in between. If we have a project that looks like it's going to be $30,000 over budget, there's usually not just one $30,000 item that we can just decide to take out. It's usually made up of 60 $500 items that we have to adjust or modify in some way in order to be able to get things back into the budget. So I appreciate what you say, Mr. Nicely, but I think there's no amount that's too small to talk about.
I'm going to answer a question about 30 minutes late. Mr. Hermes asked about the statute related to impeachment. So just for fun, in case of misconduct, incapacity, or willful neglect, which clearly serious attendance would meet that, it would require a unanimous vote of the members of the legislative body.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments about this topic? Okay. Seeing none, we're going to go ahead and move on. Number 3 on the agenda is the Community Achievement Scholarship Increase Ordinance. This was added to the agenda by Mr. Hermes. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. All right. I asked for us to talk about this in a committee meeting. Again, as Mr. Nicely had just said, we're not talking about a huge amount of money. This is a scholarship that is, it was $1,500, and now we're talking about raising it to $2,500. From the time that this was originally made back in 2001 to what the college costs are now today in 2020, it's probably a legitimate raise in the scholarship amount. My issue though was that this is money that the city is giving out that is collected through taxes. And I think what I would like to see happen with the group of people who assign this money. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I think I might know one person that's on this board that are the decision makers. I don't think it should be like that. This annual educational scholarship, I think all of the council members should know who is controlling where taxpayer dollars are going, regardless of how much it is. And so, and I also don't know how people get on this board or how these decision makers are chosen. Are they assigned? Are they appointed, voted? I don't know. So, I mean, I'd love for someone else to shed some light on this. I do know they're all non-elected officials. Yeah. So thank you for the opportunity to discuss this as well.
I think I'm the person that you should be talking to, I guess. I started it in 2001. When I asked for $1,500, a lot of the community was outraged. They thought it was too much. I did not think it was enough. I agree with the raising it. Times have changed, whatever. When I did it, I had to come up with some criteria on how we would do it. When I first did it, and when I think I was doing it, there was always one council member on the committee. And I believe it started with Renee Skidmore, maybe. I don't know if it was in 2001, but she was the council member that was there. I went around to the businesses in Erlanger and asked them, because I figured maybe they should, and people, individuals that I knew that came to my events, my park and recreation events, that were very, very interested in the city of Erlanger and worked very hard. So I asked them if they would like to be on it. I went around to the businesses, asked if anybody else would like to be on it. As it turned out, I believe the first year, the gentleman who was the manager of Ameristop on Dixie Highway was very interested in it. He thought it was a great idea. I went to Emerson's and I asked the ladies of Emerson's if they were like that. And as it turned out, one of the employees at Emerson was also an Erlanger resident. So she was Erlanger resident. She was helping me with the Emerson too. Boyle Jewelers was, the owner of Boyle's Jewelers was one of them. Silver Lake, I went to Silver Lake. Silver Lake was part of that. Tim Geraci was part of being part of doing this. We had the criteria all made up of what we wanted. We wanted it to be so much percent. I can't remember. Gee, I can't even remember what I had for breakfast at my age, but with so much percent was for academics. So much, the biggest majority was community service. And the community service was not to include, or you weren't to give a lot of weight to community service in the school. So if you went to Dixie, St. Henry's, Holy Cross, homeschooled, whatever, if you did your community service through the school only, you were to look at it as great community service, but we wanted it to be community service outside your school, truly community service, okay? Not something that you had to do because you were on the National Honor Society at school, like tutor this or do whatever. It's something that you went and did yourself. One of the gentlemen who did win one year built the shelter at Rainbow Park. He was a scout, what do you call it? The high scout. I
Eagle
don't know
Scouts.
because, yes. His community service was just one thing, was he built this shelter at the Rainbow Park. He also built a special picnic table that had a place where anybody in a wheelchair could wheel up and sit at that table. He also did a lot of work outside, going in the summer to Nicaragua to build shelters, whatever. He had an impeccable thing. And as I told everybody, when they listed these, if I miss something or wonder if I don't give somebody credit or whatever, it kind of all worked out. When everybody, I think I had 7 or 8 people, I can't remember right away how many I had, but when I had these people and everything came in, it came in that they all had either 1 was 1 or 2 was 2 or 1 or 2 or whatever. It just worked out. It just perfectly worked out. Now, if you want to go appoint other people, look around, I just had to start somewhere, and that's where I started. I asked people I knew that came to my park program that were interested in Erlanger, that volunteered for everything that I did, and I walked the businesses. Asked if they were interested. If they were, I let them participate. And it all worked out fine. I don't know if Kim continues that. Whatever she does, I'm sure it's not, the fix isn't in or something isn't not right. But I agree, let's raise it. And if you want more input, fine. If you want to go back to making sure the council person is off, it's great. Do whatever you want. But it's time when it was worked out fine. It was fine.
Mr. Hermes?
Thank you very much, Mrs. Cahill. I think it is a wonderful program, and I certainly appreciate everything that you've put into it. And again, too, I'm really not as much disputing the amount in the scholarship. I think, I would like, if we went ahead and voted on this, I would just like to maybe get some nods from council that maybe it might be wise to create some bylaws on how the board is formed and a little bit more formality to the group of decision makers for this scholarship.
And let me just jump in there. My suggestion on that, instead of creating bylaws, since I'm not really sure this entity exists, I think we just, if it was the will of council, that we would just write it into the ordinance, how the group or committee is selected.
Mr. Gatlin, do we need to do that through an ordinance, or could we also do that through a municipal order? Just handling the operations of the execution of it.
Well, I think if you have an ordinance establishing the scholarship, I think it would be clumsy to then have a municipal order that, I think all of that could be built into this ordinance, or the ordinance could defer that, it's up to city administration to make that determination. And then ultimately the city administration, whether it be the mayor or city administrator or whoever, could be in charge of that committee. It could be no different of a committee appointment to this than any of the other committees that the mayor routinely appoints.
It seems like it could have been a good idea to have a council member on that. I don't know why that was ever changed in the past.
Ms. Hoffman, given where we're at right now, I'm assuming that even if we put language in there, establishing the committee and even additional criteria in the ordinance itself on how it's awarded, I don't imagine we're going to get that done and into law by the time that the current scholarship would be awarded, would we?
I can unmute you if you'd like.
I'll answer for her. No, it wouldn't be available for this year. They actually, I think yesterday, the judges already made a selection. Sorry, Sherry, go ahead.
That's okay. Yeah, Kim has already received all the judges' scores back. She already knows who is going to receive it for this year. So it is too late to get anything in order for this year.
So I think our hopes were to have had this in place so that we could award the $2,500 this year in May versus the $1,500, correct?
And I want to challenge you on that, Mr. Meyer, because we did not properly budget for that. And we budgeted for $1,500, and I don't think it's right. I mean, how many times have we said, especially at this time, with what we're dealing with, I don't think it's right to just throw in another $1,000.
Yeah, but I'll counter that argument. I mean, I think our budget amendment is going to be $500,000 in additional payroll that wasn't budgeted either. So to say we're going to, it's only $1,000. I understand that. I mean, yeah, you are correct. We did not budget for the $2,500. We only budgeted for the $1,500.
Mrs. Pitts?
I'll say 3 different points here. I do agree that we probably should have a set group of people that we know who they are voting. Maybe like Jack said, defer it to administration to choose those people. With a council member being on, there's several of us who's had our kids apply for that scholarship, so it probably isn't a good idea to have one of us on the, that's just my thought. But the other thing is, and I'm probably the only one here saying this, but I don't think we should up it. I think we should leave it at 1,500. And here's my reasoning. I watch every year as these young, smart people get these scholarships. It's wonderful. I love it, but it's not a need-based scholarship. It's it's community service-based. It's grades. But it's mostly community service. I remember both my girls filling out the application and all the questions asked. And but what I've noticed in my 14 years on council is every year when somebody wins this, it is somebody that is just amazingly overachieving in every way. So most of those kids are already receiving a lot of scholarships in addition to that. So that's just my reasoning why I don't think we should raise it. I think 1,500 is a great additional cushion. A lot of them use it for like a laptop or for books or some of them, many have had full rides and just used it for expenses. So in my opinion, I don't think we should raise it, but I do agree that we probably should have administration or whoever choose who picks the winner. Thanks.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments about that? Okay. So I guess, do we need to decide, whether we're going to take it off the agenda, change it, or keep moving forward and have the second reading? Mr. Hermes, I saw your hand. You have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Mr. Gatlin, if we added the names of the judges to this ordinance and briefly described how they get their position, would that be considered a substantial change that it would have to get?
No, I don't know. We're just clarifying it. We're not really changing it. We're just clarifying it. So I'm fine with that.
That's why I thought that same thing. I was hoping you'd say that.
And then, Mr. Hermes, would you be willing to work on those draft edits and have those available for us to have second reading in 2 weeks?
Absolutely.
And then as they were thinking about budget amendment for the fiscal 1920 year, we can just make sure that we're accounting for the additional $1,000 at that point.
Okay.
Okay. Any other comments on this topic? Mrs. Kyle? You have to unmute yourself.
I agree with Corrine. I think the purpose of this scholarship, when we first brought it up, Bill Howard and I were on a community committee, and we presented it to council, and we had some opposition. People didn't want to be spending taxpayers' money on something like this, but we told them, we stressed the idea that this was to reward community service, because we wanted people in Erlanger, our citizens, to do more community service. And we thought if we started with the kids when they were young, this would be a great idea. The other thing is too, we did have council members who were asked to judge. In fact, one year I was asked and I had to say no because I taught at St. Henry's anymore. And so I felt like I could not judge if some of the kids that I taught were involved. So I just excused myself. But anyway, I agree with whoever said that maybe administration needs to be involved, and whatever decision they would make as far as who is judging, I would be comfortable with that. As far as raising the price, I don't think it's necessary. As Corrine said, a lot of these kids have other scholarships. I know at St. Henry's, we have some scholarships that are maybe just $1,000. There's one that was named in my honor. It's a Latin scholarship for anybody that's going to college that continues to study the classics. And the kids don't really, apply for that because of the money. It's more the honor and a little additional money to help them out. But most of these kids win other scholarships. There's a lot of big scholarships out there. So I don't think the kids are necessarily going to feel like they're more motivated to apply because it's $1,000 more. So I kind of agree with the mayor that you don't really have to do this. In fact, our mayor won one of the first ones that we had out there. I remember when Jessica came and won the scholarship. And so it's just quite an honor for these kids. And as Corrine said, usually they're very, very outstanding students. I'm just amazed at all the things that they do. And so, I mean, I'm comfortable either way, either with the 1,500, 2,500, doesn't matter to me. But I would be comfortable with administration deciding who would judge this. Thanks.
Anybody else have any comments? Okay. So what I'm hearing is that we're okay. It seems like the majority of you are okay with adding some language in to the ordinance that clearly shows who the judges are and that it's picked by administration. So we can add that language in there. Mr. Gatlin is saying it's not a big enough change to where we have to redo the first reading. So we're still good to go with the second reading. Is that accurate, Mr. Gatlin?
That's correct. And I think, Mr. Hermes, you're going to shoot an email to me with whatever changes or make whatever changes you want, or we can chat about it.
Sure.
All right.
All right. Seeing that there are no other hands raised, we'll go ahead and continue on the agenda. Number 4 is the demolition incentive ordinance that was added to the agenda by Mr. Meyer. So go ahead.
Yeah, I don't actually recall asking for this item to be on the agenda. I didn't have anything additional to talk about, for this tonight. I know we'll have some additional things to talk about once we actually start talking about the budget. But I believe with our first reading, we struck out the language in the whereas around the $100,000. So this is essentially just establishing the program dependent on funding in the budget.
All right. Easy enough. Moving right along. We have the trailer ordinance, number 5, Mr. Meyer.
Yeah, this is one of the items that I did share that original draft. And this is around the nuisance ordinance and the position and location and the number of trailers. I know Mr. Kramer and I have had, a number of discussions about this, Mr. Catlin as well. And this was just looking to help clarify, or add some additional clarity and take the interpretation out for not just, some of the current items that are out there now, but ongoing as well. So there, I mean, as I read it, there's certainly some ambiguity. I know that I think it just talks about residential areas, and then the number that it had in the front of the house versus in the rear of the house, and nothing around. Not necessarily letting anything be enough flexibility where there might be a vacant lot that's being maintained. And even as I read it and see some of the ambiguity, it says a boat or trailer, but if you got a boat on a trailer, that's technically 2 items. And while I don't think that's necessarily been an issue as of yet, the next person could be looking at that, interpret that differently. So that was the goal here, was to add a little bit of clarity within that nuisance ordinance around the storage of those items.
Okay, does anybody have any questions or comments for Mr. Meyer on this topic?
Mr. Meyer, I just want to clarify what's going on here. It appears from this amendment that, okay. So, I mean, it looks like there's really no substantive change. Is that what I'm getting here? That you've struck through only one of any such vehicles, but then you've added it to 2 and 3? Only one of such any vehicles?
Yeah, so the idea is that we're still limiting, front yard items, but there also should be some language in there talking about residential parcels versus just residential area. Trying to tie more back to the zone, occupied residential versus just a generic area.
I guess with the practical effect of, if you had multiple lots, you could have multiple vehicles, right? Is that what I'm sort of seeing here?
Yeah, correct. Or if you had something in the rear of the lot that you could actually have 2 in the rear if you had a trailer and a boat if it was in the rear.
Right.
Mr. Gatlin, do you have any other questions for Mr. Meyer?
No, I just wanted to make sure we were on the same page as to what we were trying to accomplish. That's all. When I first read this, I didn't really see changes, but now when I'm reading it more closely, I understand
Okay.
what Mr. Meyer is going at here.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions? Okay, I don't see anybody else's hand raised. So with that, we'll move on to the last item on the agenda. It is Mr. Myers as well, the agenda for council meetings, municipal order.
Yeah, so this was an attempt to move a few things, back as I start to, think about some of the other meetings. I liked our last council meeting where we heard from nearly every department head, minus finance. And that was part of the goal. As I think about, some of the other organizations where, finance will give a report out. I just think it adds a little bit more transparency into actually what's going on. I know it's not that we're not still having those reports, whether it's from, our PDS representatives or OKI or the Kenton County Alliance, just making sure that they're in there and we're querying from them. Part of my desire, with the way that I drafted those changes was actually to hear directly from the department heads on a very regular basis on those key things that are going on. Not real lengthy reports. I know we do get the written reports, but I think it's still good to hear direct words from our department heads on what's going on and things that they have.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for Mr. Meyer? Mrs. Pitts?
I don't have any questions. I just kind of agree with him. I do miss hearing that, and it is nice because the people at home don't read the reports, and so it's kind of nice to just share everything with them a little bit. Thanks.
Okay, does anybody else have any other questions or comments?
Can you see me? Can you see
We
me?
can. Yes, ma'am.
I agree with you, Gary. I like the individual reports, and it helps the people who are in the audience that don't mingle with us that often, that they're there for something else maybe. I really like your idea of going back to the way we used to do it, every committee making a report.
Mr. Hermes?
I personally, well, to what Mrs. Pitt said, I'm afraid that sometimes when all the reports are heard in the meeting, that people don't read the reports beforehand. And I do think that it's important for the council members to read them ahead of time, read them before they're hearing it for the first time in a public meeting. So I think that when it's all read or when it's reported in the meeting, it decentivizes them from making sure they're on top of it before the meeting. The other thing is I like the length of the meetings as it is. Not hearing all the reports. When there is something important to report, it gets reported. But, we haven't had any 3-hour meetings for a long time. And I personally am in favor of staying away from 3-hour meetings.
I'll agree with you. I do like the brevity of the meetings. The one piece though that, where I have really, tried to, think about this a little bit more was just around just the transparency, right? I mean, Renee said those reports were not, it's not like I at least as far as I'm aware, I don't know that they're published on the website anywhere. I'm just trying to bring more transparency, more, insight into if someone has a limited amount of time and they're going to pay attention to a council meeting, then they can hear, 2 minutes from, police, 2 minutes from fire, 2 minutes from Kara around finances, and just understand where that is. I know some people, a great majority of people don't like to talk about budgets and, where the finances are, but I think, having a quick report out, every once a month is not necessarily a bad thing. And if we, keep those brief, then it shouldn't add an extended amount of time, to those meetings.
I guess I'm gonna say something. Is my thought process is nobody has been kept from giving a report this entire time. So we've added more open-ended pieces to the agenda to where it can be interpreted by the council member to do an announcement, do news, something that's going on, something that you want to report on. We've yet to keep a single council member from giving a report of any kind that they wanted to talk about. Nobody was ever shut down or stopped from talking. So when we talk about transparency, we've yet to not have somebody be able to speak and give a report that they want to. Mrs. Pitts?
I don't think Gary means that because he's not even saying council to give reports. He's saying the department heads to give reports. And, I've never felt like I couldn't say anything about anything. I always speak up in the meetings, and I think we all have. I just think, like in the council meetings, we have the mayor's report and we have the city administrator report. It's just kind of nice to have the police report and the fire report. I just think we miss hearing from them, just a brief report, not necessarily us doing it, but the department heads doing it. And just to answer Tyson's question, I can't imagine that making us not read reports. I've always read reports, and I'm pretty sure everybody else here does too. I don't think that would make us stop reading the reports. Just my opinion.
Mr. Hermes?
I will apologize to Mr. Gatlin in advance for putting him on the spot, but I do remember him saying, 4 or 5 years ago that with the other meetings that he attends in different cities, Erlanger was always overly formal about the procedure of the meeting, and that a lot of other cities didn't necessarily operate that way. Mr. Gatlin, would you mind?
I agree. I agree.
Yeah, so with that, I mean, it would be my preference that we not get back into doing it that way, and try to keep the meetings more brief and succinct. And honestly, I think more people pay attention when they know it's going to be a hour-long meeting. We get people that are tuning in on Facebook or watching it the next morning on YouTube, and they're more willing to watch if it's an hour meeting versus a 3 YouTube segment meeting put together. Someone's just not going to watch all that.
And let me clarify, every city does things differently. And I don't think from a legal perspective, there's a right or wrong answer to any of it. And Mr. Hermes, when you and I kind of went city by city, when we were battling SD1 early in your regime, I mean, there are some cities that are very, very, very informal. Erlanger's on the more formal end. I think it's just got to be what the body is comfortable doing. But there's certainly absolutely nothing legally requiring a lot of the, at the end of the day, an agenda is to provide notice to citizens of ordinances that are being considered or municipal orders that are being considered. So purely from a legal notice perspective, the only thing that's absolutely required of an agenda is the legislative section. And some cities literally have their agendas that thin. Erlanger obviously has a little bit more of a formal script. I'm not going to sit here and say what's right and what's wrong. I think each city has a different flavor and a different feel. But I still say that Erlanger has probably one of the more formal agendas of any city I've seen.
Any other questions, Mrs. Kyle?
I just think that maybe we could have something on the agenda that says reports of department heads. And then if the mayor could say, do any of our department heads have a report or any information that they would like to share with our citizens? Because most of the time, I know when we gave our police report, Patty and I would try to just hit a few highlights. And then we would call on the chief. Chief, do you have anything to add? So maybe if you just have it on the agenda where, you say, do any of the department heads have anything that they would, that way they could do that. Plus, I thought that the reports were shared on our website, but I'm not sure. And maybe if we could put our reports on the website, that would help. If citizens are interested, they can go to the website and read those. Yeah. But I never read a report. I mean, I always looked at it ahead of time and then just kind of hit a few highlights. But that's just my suggestion.
Ms. Kyle, our reports are put up on our website. And I think what you're saying is a fair add to the agenda. It's kind of open-ended. What the goal of the changes originally were to make it more, or make it less formal, more open-ended, bigger topics, less very detailed. So, I mean, to add in their reports of department heads, that's fairly open-ended, so that they can give one if they want to, if they have something that they really want to share. I mean, I think that's a fair add. Any other conversation about that? Mr. Meyer, do you have any other conversation about that?
No, I don't have anything else.
Okay.
So I think we just need clarification, are we moving forward with this municipal order at our next meeting? Or are we tweaking it? I think it's still kind of hanging out there.
Well, I would like to go with it as is. If we feel there's a need to kind of strike things out, at each meeting, we can certainly amend those agendas as we do every meeting.
Okay.
I think there's too much. I think it's adding a tremendous amount. This is actually, from what I've read, which I've gone through this ordinance in detail, it adds actually more back than we had a year and a half ago. So we've added stuff that has never even been in there before. Because Gary, you have in here reports of city operations from the department heads, but then you also have the reports of task forces, the reports of standing committees, reports of representatives. So you're adding stuff in here that has never even been in here prior to making the changes.
Yeah, no, that's correct. I mean, if there's, in most cases, when we think about our standing committees, if we have nothing from a, building and codes perspective, then there's nothing to report. And especially if we're going to hear from the department heads, that's less to report in that time. But a part of me looks at it as we're also, and maybe this is where, I'm a little more idealist that, our standing committees are potentially legislative in nature and they focus on those pieces, and department heads talk about department heads, the administrative aspects, but still, covering those bases.
But in reality, we know that this is going to add a layer of redundancy. Okay, so if you're going to have, because it's going to fall back into exactly how we were doing it, but now we're going to also have the department head giving a report as well. And then we're going to have the committee members. So, we're just adding, what the goal was trying to make this more efficient. All of the reports are available. We had started this when I was on council. All the reports are emailed out and they're all available on the website. We had started the idea of, if you don't have anything to add that is critical, then say the report is out on the website and we move on, in an effort to be efficient with everybody's time. So I just would really challenge you to look back through this, and before we add everything and more to the changes that we made last year, I'd really look back through this. It's just my ask of you, because we made those changes for a reason last year, and this is undoing everything we did and adding more in.
I do understand that.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. All right. With that, we can go ahead and end the meeting. We have a motion, Mr. Hermes and Mrs. Kyle. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, motion carried. This meeting is adjourned. Have a good evening.